Thank you, Jason, and thank you everybody for coming. So today we're going to talk about politics, which is a very dirty word, at least in Romania and in Central and Eastern Europe. So it's a very difficult thing to do even in the most tolerant and open context as unfinished. And it's going to be a little bit of a meta talk because we're going to talk about how we talk about politics, which we think is one of the main problems that we have in Romania, the fact that we shy away from talking about politics, we shy away from the really important discussions that we need to have in society. And we think that this is some kind of hypocrisy because politics is around us, politics affects us. We have politics in our schools, universities, in our families and friends group. And unfortunately, we don't know how to talk about politics, and we think of politics as a taboo. It's one of the biggest taboos in Romania, because every time we talk about politics, we think somebody has an interest in it, an interest in that they stand to gain from it, and not in the way that, you know, community or society stand to gain from it. So we are going to take you through a few important things that happen in Romanian society today and try to understand together why politics is a taboo, why there's so much anger and apathy in our society when it comes to politics, and finally, how can we change this thing and actually have a healthy conversation about how to run our society, because politics is about running our society in a way that we can all be happy and content with. Yeah, great.
This is a graph. Răzvan talked. We have to think about why that is, and in order to think of why that is, we have to look at the case of Romania, because this has happened in many other places throughout the world. But in Romania, politics has become detached from society and economics, in the sense that economics has moved forward. There has been a lot of growth, especially in the last 20 years. Society has advanced. People have become more modern. I mean, look at the way people are dressed in the big cities in Romania. You cannot distinguish Bucharest from any other major capital in the European Union. And this is what this graph shows. It shows GDP growth since 1990 until today. You can see the first decade of the post-communist transition, so 1990, 1999, nothing happened. Crises throughout the Central and Eastern European countries. And then suddenly, in 2000, there is a boom. And the economy skyrockets. You have 788% GDP growth since 2000 until 2023. That's huge. That's the biggest increase throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Why is that? Because our politicians took two major decisions, and this they should be commended for, but that's the only thing we're going to commend them for: joining NATO and joining the European Union. It was an easy decision to make. 90% of the population approved of these decisions, and they did implement the reforms needed to join these structures. And since 2000, when we got the first pre-accession funds from the European Union, you can see the economy skyrocketed. But not only that, you had huge amounts of foreign direct investment, because Romania was now a safe place. It was under the umbrella of NATO. You had 65 billion euros coming in from the European Union as European funds. You had Romanians abroad sending money back home. So this was an enormous growth. But at the same time, politics became detached from society, because the politicians remained the same, whereas society moved forward.
And that's not the whole story, because if it was a case, we wouldn't be here today. In fact, what happened is that while you know, there was a very modern and sophisticated Romania growing in the big cities, in some pockets of wealth, that wasn't the case for the whole country. And behind me, you can see a very it's a graphic, it's a visualization of this inequality that grew over time. And today, today we stand in Bucharest, which is one of the wealthiest capitals in the European Union, in that it's situated at around 180% today of the average of development of the EU, while just a few hundred kilometers away there's Moldova, our Moldova here in Romania, which is at around 50% of the EU's development average. So that's a huge difference, that's a huge inequality, because that wealth that Vlad was talking about, that development that we were talking about, did not go to every place, wasn't distributed equally throughout our country. And that's an additional reason why politics have become so disconnected from citizens, because there was such a big part of Romania that wasn't brought up from poverty, from the crisis, and from the tragedy that the 90s and the 2000s was. So we've got another part of Romania which is angry, which doesn't see politics as a way out of their situation, and which is very angry and is ready to vote and to support those politicians and movements which want to uproot the status quo and change everything in our country, even those things that seem to work, the little things that seem to work.
And here we come to the political effects of this. We can see voter turnout for parliamentary elections in Romania since the 90s until the last ones in 2020. We're going to have new ones in 2024, and you can see the obvious downward trend from almost 80% of people voting after the 1989 revolution and so on, and then declining in every single year except 2012. We'll ignore that for now, and arriving in 2020 when only 31% of the population went out to vote. Why is that? And the reason we found in our research is, among others, it's also the inequality that Răzvan talked about. It's also the fact that politicians have become detached from society, as we were saying earlier. You have a game of musical chairs, basically, with the same political elites revolving in different public offices each election year. And if you look at the makeup of the Romanian parliament since 1990 until now, you will see the same familiar faces in each of those positions. And then voters probably ask themselves, and that's the causal mechanism that we found, why bother to vote at all if it's going to be the same people that run this country? And this is called the cartel party hypothesis, which basically says that you have two parties, a two-party system that excludes all other political competition from politics. And it does this in many ways. For example,
and it does so by basically isolating from society. Political parties become monopolize political power, and they use state funds to support themselves, and they have less of a need to talk to you and to entice you to become volunteers, to bring you in their effort to go to power, because they do not have a need for those kinds of resources, human resources or financial resources, because they can get them from the state. So they become very isolated, basically, and that's why we see at every election the same party is coming to power, because they have the resources, the financial resources, basically, to stay in power every time. And while you can see political conflict happening, you cannot see real political conflict, because it's all on the surface. Because every political party is happy to go into alliances with other parties and keep all the newcomers out. That's why we see protest parties struggling to get in the parliament, while anti-system parties rise and fall, because it's so difficult to break the blockade. And at the same time, this creates a lot of frustration, a lot of distrust, because every time you seem to be close to changing the old guard, they seem to be coming back, because people do not believe that their vote still matters today, because there's no way of actually changing those who are in power, because they become so entrenched and they become so secure in their places that it's really, really difficult to uproot them. And here you can see behind me the visualization of this problem, the fact that people really distrust any political institution, any political, democratic political institutions in the country. So you've got the parliament and the parties and the government and the president in the last places, far, far behind other institutions in our society. And that's because nobody believes that those institutions really work for them. The modern and sophisticated Romania that we have seen, that we have talked about before, has become so apathetic that it doesn't want to go out and vote, because it seems that politicians have become so disconnected with their needs and the way they have evolved that they have no reason to go out and vote for them or to trust in them. While the other Romania that we've been talking about, the one that's forgotten and the one that lives in poverty, feels betrayed and feels that nobody has ever cared for them. And this has very, very perverse and very, I think, difficult to comprehend now effects that we will talk about in a second.
And it's become almost a truism to say that education fixes everything, and only if we invested enough in education. But in this context, it actually matters. Not necessarily to invest more in education, although that is badly needed, but to change the things we teach in our schools. Because disdain for politics begins in schools. If you've ever experimented the 12 years of the Romanian education system, of the pre-university education system, you will find that talking about politics is a complete taboo. Even if you bring the subject up, you will be immediately shut down. And I'm not talking here about like doing political propaganda or stuff like that in schools. That's obviously wrong. That shouldn't happen. But we should be able to engage with political ideas, with political concepts. We should be able to have true civic education in our schools, in our pre-university system. We should be able to have an education for democracy. We should be able that after 12 years of school for us to be able to go out and make these crucial decisions that we expect from 18-year-olds to take regarding the future of our countries, of the European Union, because we're members of the European Union, and so on. And we don't do that. We don't do it because teachers are afraid to bring these subjects up. We don't do it because headmasters are appointed politically, so they want to compensate for that fact. And we don't do it for a lot of other reasons. And that's why we see that youth turnout, as it is in other countries, but especially in Romania, youth turnout in every type of election is so low.
And just to build on that point, it's very hypocritical, because as Vlad said, politics is all around us, politics is in our schools, our headmasters and the leaders of our universities are political appointees. They go usually during evenings on talk shows and they talk about politics, but you're not allowed to talk about politics in schools. And that's very weird for anybody who has studied abroad, who knows that when you go into a university abroad, politicians are usually called in universities, and you get to debate them, you get to criticize them, and you get to debate any political topic that comes to mind. And that's a normal thing, because people are used to talking about politics and are used to talking about a subject that affects their lives. In Romania, we don't do that, even though politics, is present in every aspect of our life. And finally, where does this lead? This lack of awareness of political topics around us, of the disdain for politics and apathy and anger that we see in society. It leads, well, obviously, those who have watched the news in the past few years, to extremism, to anger that is transformed and comes on the political stage as extremism and very ugly forms of political manifestation. And we have seen during the pandemic and after the pandemic, and we can keep seeing really ugly forms of political violence, of violent political discourse that seem to have taken over any kind of informed debate, any kind of debate, little debate that we have in our country or that we had in our country. Our news cycles are dominated by extreme politicians who go and talk about the most sinister things basically, and they try to rally up those forces that have had it with the current political system, and they try to bring that anger that is society on the political stage. That is the effect of not caring and not being able to keep up with how society develops, and of leaving big parts of our country in poverty, and at the same time talking about how much Romania has developed. Both are true, and we need to accept this truth that while we have developed a lot, we also left a big part of our society behind, and that part of the society is coming back and telling us, you know, we exist, we are here, and we're going to vote for these guys, these violent guys, these horrible guys, who will take you out of power because somebody finally speaks to us in our country. So that's what's happening right now.
So to sum up this part, we have like three factors at play here. First of all, you have the political monopoly, the monopoly on politics, the cartel party system that we talked about, which obviously creates reactions against it because you don't like these guys, you'll vote for anyone who opposes them. You also have no civic education in schools, no education for democracy, or subjects that will prepare you for a democratic life, for a democracy in practice, basically. And you also have high levels of economic inequality in this country. But this is the case also in other Eastern European countries as well. This is a very dangerous mix, so to say. So now we can ask ourselves, and this is our final slide, what can we do to fix this? What are the solutions that can help us fix this? You have institutional solutions which would require the overhaul of the entire political system. That's very difficult. That has been tried. Many of us probably went to protests, political protests since 2015, some since 2012, some since the 90s. That works, but not so well, as we have seen. We can also do what we were talking about earlier. Change school curriculums. Change the way we teach our children how to think about democracy, and actually teach children how to think, and young people how to think about democracy. Stop with the political appointments in schools and go towards a more open, a more diverse, and a more democratic way of thinking about politics from a young age, because after that we will see results.
And if there's one takeaway from today is don't be afraid to be political, because it's important to be political. It's important to talk about politics, because otherwise, maybe this is a cliche already, but some other people will make that decision for you. So go back to your families and friends and talk about politics and talk about the subjects you care about, because we need to get used to talk about these things without having this big taboo above, a big cloud above our heads that politics is something dirty. Politics is dirty because we make it so it can be less dirty. So thank you very much, and now we're open for questions, I guess. We are open to any kind of question in English
Hi.
or Romanian or...
I was curious if you could frame what we're seeing this year with the presidential election from these references you made earlier, like some of the discourses, the alliances, the recent breakups that we saw between parties. I'm curious how are all of the things you mentioned influencing this?
Well, it's part of this game we call the musical chairs game. So politics has become very personalized. It's about the persons and not the ideas. So basically you can swap any candidate that you see on the political stage and their parties, and you kind of get the same ideas from them, because there's not a lot on the ideas market right now. It's more about how loud we shout, how well we portray ourselves. So this is also because of what we talked about the cartel. Basically, parties have become, they're friends with each other, they help each other when it's the case. So basically they put out candidates that would only further this monopoly that they have on the political stage. So it's essentially just a matter of keeping the game going, of staying in power, and not really about changing something very fundamental about this country. That doesn't go, for example, for extremist parties or anti-system parties, because they're really trying to get in the game. But once you get in the game, it's very comfortable to be there. So you don't have to put up a lot of effort, basically, to win the election, as long as you're in the parliament and you receive funds from the state, as long as you have a cozy place. And that's why we see, once parties get into the parliament, that they basically become less and less anti-system, and the system somehow helps them become accustomed to the way things go. And Vlad, if you want to add on that.
I think you covered it.
Up there.
Yeah, I don't know where the mic is, but...
I have one here. Hey there. Can you explain
Hi.
why do you think extremist movements emerge after the pandemic?
Yes, I can't see you. I don't have my glasses, but I'll reply. This was a global trend. Obviously, you've had parties that emerged after the pandemic because of the lockdowns, and in Romania you actually have two parties that grew out of the pandemic. One more extremist than the other, let's put it this way. Both of them have gotten representation in the European Parliament. And the reasons for it have to do with what we talked about today. There's a lot of frustration in Romanian society. There's a lot of frustration from that forgotten Romania, the Romania of the countryside, the Romania of the small cities, who feel that the benefits of EU integration, all that economic growth that we showed today, didn't trickle down, let's say, didn't trickle down to them as well. And the difference is so visible. You just have to take a car and go to Bucharest, go to Cluj, go to Iași, go to Timișoara, and you will find yourself in a completely different world. And obviously the question that you are going to ask yourself is, why? Why am I not as worthy as these people who live in the capital, who live in the big cities? Obviously, I am as worthy as they are of, living a good life and so on. And we've seen this happening in Poland as well. If you look at how Polish people voted in the 2015 elections, you will see a very clear divide between rural areas and small cities voting for the Law and Justice Party, which was the rightist, far-right party in Poland, and then you will see all the other major cities voting for the Civic Coalition of Donald Tusk. So this is a very clear dividing line, not just in Romania, but in other Eastern European countries as well.
So
And
it's
if
not
I-
necessarily related to the pandemic, like it's been before this trend.
It was increased by the pandemic, so to say. The pandemic was a very clear avenue for these forces to coagulate against a common theme, basically, which were the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates and so on. Yeah.
But what we're saying, if you don't have the right context for this to happen, this doesn't happen. So the pandemic was just a catalyst for these reactions in society. Because if you remember, we had extremist parties before. Corneliu Vadim Tudor has been in the second round of elections in 2000. The party of Dan Diaconescu, which was this crazy TV guy, was the third largest party in the Romanian parliament before the time of the Save Romania Union and so on. So these people have been left behind for a long time, and there's just different themes in different political cycles that sometimes manage to activate them, and they get to express themselves politically through these parties.
Okay, can I ask?
Yeah.
So this is more like a technical question. Do you have a plan on how to stay unbiased? And this leads me to the second question. Do you have what is your end goal here? Raising awareness? I haven't been here from the start. Do you organize as an NGO? What is your end goal? I mean, the moment your public, your audience notices a slight shadow of being unbiased, I think you can lose them, and it's important to know. I am part of your audience from Instagram, and I see your beef in the comments with with everyone, and it really matters to me on your plan to stay unbiased. And if you have one in the
if I may, there's no value-free knowledge. There's no unbiased opinion when it comes to politics. So we do not claim to be the most objective. We make mistakes and we have our own political opinions. We try not to put them on our page, but sometimes, of course, we can be unbiased when it comes to human rights, to the values of democracy, and to for example, Romania's membership of the EU, which we truly believe that it's a beneficial thing, and we can prove that, and we can argue for that. So I think that it's important when you think about politics is to think that everybody has their opinion, they're entitled to their opinion, and there's no value-free or objective discussion about politics. What we do try to do is that we try to keep things as clear-cut as possible. We try to be open with our biases so people know where we're coming from, and they can, we can talk about the fundamentals of what we think, and if they disagree, they disagree, but at least we try to agree on the facts and on the stories we try to tell each other, and we listen to each other. So that's the goal that we have, to talk about it, not to shy away from being biased. Shouldn't be, you can be biased and right, or you can be biased and wrong. So biased isn't necessarily a bad thing. Political discourse has made it, a slur or something you throw at your enemy, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
We have a question here. I'm going to be the voice. The question is, you talked earlier about entering politics and not being afraid of it, but in the same time you talked about the monopoly of the politicians. So what should I do if I want to enter the politics, but the monopoly you described is going to reject me automatically? Thank you.
You can try. It's very difficult, but we have had breakthroughs. We have had anti-system parties, reform parties, Eurosceptic parties, extremist parties who have managed to enter parliament, and they've all, if you look at a common thread of all these parties, they were all anti-system. In 2012, they were populist anti-system. In 2016, they were pro-European modernizing anti-system. In 2020, they were Eurosceptic, extreme right anti-system parties which did manage to enter into parliament. The problem is that they always failed. But we can always try for more. We can always try again, because that's the beauty of democracy. If we are careful, there's always going to be the next election. So yeah.
Hello, I'm here. You talked about solutions, but only a small bit. And I was curious, especially about the educational part and the schools part and everything, because you say we need to educate people, but actually, the Ministry of Education decides all the, what children learn in school. So I was curious, how do you see this? What solutions do you have? Especially because I'm also part of a social movement. We gathered people to clean up the country, and our solution then was, okay, let's leave out what the Ministry of Environment is doing. Let's be the change, So what solutions do you see coming from us or from other countries in order to educate these young people to be more involved?
There's many examples of good practices, even in our region, in Central and Eastern Europe. And NGOs can do a lot. We have an NGO. We go out and talk in schools, in high schools throughout the country. We also want to change the high school curriculum, basically, so that you will be taught these things in the 11th grade, so just before you turn 18 and you have the right to vote. But we strongly believe that NGOs cannot do this alone. They cannot replace the state. The NGOs can influence state policy and governmental policy, but the government has a duty to enact these changes, and you have to convince them with arguments. It's very frustrating, we know, but that's the only way forward, we think. Yeah.
And
Are doing things for that because I didn't see them there, and I would have wanted to see them there, you know, because it's truly important.
there's two types of politics. In between elections, we do pressure politics, in that we try to pressure elected politicians to do things. And then we have party politics, which is just as important as pressure politics. So my advice would be even more radical for our discussion, that go get involved, support a party, vote for it, sign up in a party, and try to get elected. Don't shy away from running for office, because if we don't run for office, you know, we can build thousands of NGOs and be active every time of the day, but this is a macro project to change these things. It's a generational project. So go get elected, sign up in a party. Don't think as parties as taboos. Find the best party you can on the political stage and join it or support it or donate to it or do anything you can to support it. And yes, we do stuff. We do stuff online. We do stuff in, you know, like this. We do talks. But there's just the two of us. We've had some impact. That's why I guess we've been invited here. But we need more people to get involved and more people to do things on the ground so that we can achieve these goals of talking differently and getting involved in politics without the sense of shame that we have right now, basically.
Thanks. I see three barriers to the development of a civic society that you don't necessarily see in Western Europe. And the three are, and I'd love to hear what you think about it, is the unnatural relationship between church and state. The second is the absence of a free press, which is where you would normally see and spark debate. And the third is the thing that keeps the musical chairs going, which is corruption. Because once you're in that circle of seats, you're basically feeding the trough. So, and just your thoughts, please.
That's right. You also saw on that slide with public opinion polls, the church is at the top of the people's confidence, but that's the failure of politics, basically. That's the failure of all the other institutions, that people turn to the church for guidance because the church has always been there, and so on. And I totally agree that we have a difficult relation, a state-church relations. You saw the big cathedral probably in Bucharest, like the largest Orthodox cathedral in the world. That's obviously a problem. On the free press argument, I would kind of disagree in that, yes, the parties give out, they pump money into the press, and the press delivers, like, good articles, TV time, and so on. But there's also a growing independent press landscape in Romania, and we know many of these people, and they fight the difficult fight that they have to fight. And on the corruption aspect, yeah, you're right, corruption is there. But I think Romanians, some of them are tired of this topic, of the anti-corruption topic. And we saw that in the last few elections, this hasn't been that much of a topic anymore. People want to talk about the standards of living, they want to talk about inequality, they want to talk about inflation, the war, and so on. So corruption and anti-corruption politics has been declining. And that's kind of understandable, because you had 20 years of this rhetoric from politicians on both sides of the aisle, basically. Razvan.
So our argument is that we need to find other topics to get people involved, because anti-corruption is not a battle cry anymore. And that happens with any kind of topic, whatever important it may be. And what we basically argues that we need to find another way of approaching these issues that we still have, and all of those three are still issues. But I think, so what we're trying to do is go back to basics and try to get people, try to bring young people into the conversation and teach them how to talk about politics before they get into the political arena. So that's our very macro argument. But anti-corruption is still important. Unfortunately, we don't have an EU Commission, for example, which is interested in that, so we don't have external support for this topic anymore. And I would also argue that anti-corruption is not as important in Romania, also because we're not the only corrupt country. Italy is very corrupt, and it's a very developed country. We have other countries in Eastern Europe who are more corrupt than Romania right now. So basically, we've come to the realization that we have other topics to care about, and corruption, goes on in every country. We need to, of course, keep an eye on it, but we've got other priorities right now, and we couldn't possibly keep that in the debate for decades to come. So basically, we need to change the topic.
And I think that's almost the end of our time, but we'll be here if you want to ask us stuff or want to talk to us. So thank you.